You lost, sweetheart." One of the men at the bar smirked when Eliza Monroe stepped into the late-night diner, her old jacket and foggy round glasses clearly out of place among the regulars. Another guy approached her table with a beer bottle, tapping his fingers on the surface. "You cosplaying Rambo. We don't take walk-ins from the movies." Eliza simply took a sip of coffee, her gaze calm as if she hadn't heard a word. But not even 20 seconds later, all three men lay sprawled on the tile floor, and the chair she had been sitting on hadn't even finished spinning. Everyone else in the diner was just beginning to realize they had insulted the wrong person. The diner was a rundown spot off a dusty Texas highway, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered like it was on its last legs and the air smelled of fried onions and motor oil. It was past midnight when Eliza walked in her boots, leaving faint smudges on the cracked linoleum. Her brown jacket was frayed at the cuffs, her jeans faded to a soft gray, and her long black hair hung loose, tangled from the wind. She wore round glasses smudged and slightly crooked, and carried a scuffed backpack slung over one shoulder. To the folks inside Truckers Locals and a few drifters, she looked like nobody. Just a woman who didn't belong, sitting alone by the window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before she even touched it. The bald guy at the bar was the first to take a shot. His gut hung over his belt, his t-shirt stained with sweat and ketchup. He leaned back his stool, creaking under his weight, and let out a laugh that turned heads. "Didn't know this place started accepting strays," he said, loud enough to make sure everyone heard. His buddy in a leather jacket, a wiry guy with a fake tan and a gold chain, chuckled and added, "Bet she learned her ninja moves on YouTube." The third guy, younger with a buzz cut and a beer bottle swinging loosely in his hand, sauntered over to her table. He tapped the tabletop hard, making her coffee cup rattle. "This ain't no cosplay cafe. Rambo," he said, grinning like he'd just won a prize. A few people snickered, and the diner's hum seemed to pause, waiting for her to react. Eliza didn't look up right away. She adjusted her glasses slow and deliberate, and took a sip of her coffee, her hands steady despite the eyes on her. The buzz-cut guy leaned closer, his shadow falling across her table, his breath sour with beer. "What, you deaf or something?" he said louder now, glancing back at his friends for a laugh. They didn't disappoint. The bald guy slapped the bar, and the leather jacket guy snorted. "Maybe she's lost, looking for the thrift store." The room was watching now, the air thick with tension. A waitress froze mid-step, her tray tilted, and an old man at the counter squinted over his coffee mug. Eliza finally met the buzz-cut guy's eyes, her gaze calm but sharp like she was measuring him. It threw him off, and his grin faltered for a split second. A woman in a tight red dress sitting at a booth near the jukebox decided to join in. She flicked her cigarette ash onto the floor and leaned forward, her voice dripping with mockery. "Honey, you look like you wandered out of a homeless shelter. Why don't you clean yourself up before you try sitting with the grown-ups?" The room erupted in laughter, sharper now, like a blade being honed. She tossed her hair back, expecting Eliza to shrink. Instead, Eliza set her coffee cup down the ceramic, clinking softly against the table. She reached into her backpack, pulled out a small dog-eared notebook, and flipped it open, her fingers steady. The woman's smirk faded as Eliza jotted something down, her pen moving with precision, like she was cataloging the moment. The laughter died down, replaced by uneasy glances. Nobody knew what she was writing, but the act itself felt like a warning. He didn't like that. He reached for her backpack, quick and cocky, like he was daring her to stop him. That's when it happened. Eliza's hand shot out, catching his wrist before he could touch the strap. She twisted just enough, and he yelped, his knees buckling. In one fluid motion, she slid out of her chair, hooked her foot behind his ankle, and yanked. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, the beer bottle skittering under a table. The leather jacket guy was already moving, lunging across the table with a clumsy swing. Eliza stepped aside, smooth as water, and drove her elbow into his jaw. He dropped, clutching his face, cursing through gritted teeth. The bald guy, slower but meaner, fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a folding knife, flicking it open with a click that echoed in the now silent diner. A grizzled mechanic in oil-stained coveralls, sitting at the end of the counter, decided to pipe up. He wiped his hands on a rag and sneered, "What's a girl like you doing playing tough? Go back to flipping burgers or whatever you do." His buddies at the counter chuckled, egging him on. Eliza didn't respond, but she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small weathered compass, its needle still pointing north, despite the scratches on its face. She set it beside her coffee cup, her fingers lingering on the brass edge. The mechanic's laugh caught in his throat, his eyes fixed on the compass like it was something he recognized but couldn't place. The room's jeering softened as if the object carried a weight nobody could name. Eliza's silence wasn't just defiance. It was a challenge daring them to keep going. The cook stopped flipping burgers, his spatula frozen in midair. The jukebox playing some old Waylon Jennings tune skipped and went quiet. Eliza didn't blink. She grabbed the edge of a chair and shoved it hard into the bald guy's knees. He stumbled and she pushed again, pinning him against the table. His head smacked the edge, and he crumpled the knife clattering away. 17 seconds. 3 thuds. The diner was so quiet you could hear the hum of the neon sign outside. Eliza slid back into her seat, adjusted her jacket, and picked up her coffee. Her hands shook just a little, but her face was calm, like she'd just swatted a fly. The bald guy groaned, trying to sit up, his voice thick with pain. Cheap shots, he spat, wiping blood from his lip. Coward. The leather jacket guy was still holding his jaw, muttering curses under his breath. The buzz-cut kid just lay there, eyes wide, like he was replaying it in his head. The regulars stared, some half-standing, others frozen with forks in their hands. A waitress, her ponytail bouncing, dropped a tray of mugs, and they shattered coffee pooling on the floor. The cook stood there, mouth open, grease dripping onto the grill. Nobody moved for a long moment, like they were waiting for the world to make sense again. The diner owner burst out from the kitchen, his apron stained with grease and ketchup. His face was red veins bulging in his neck. "Do you even know what you just did?" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Eliza. "I'm calling the cops." An old man at the counter, his flannel shirt patched at the elbows, shook his head. "She's probably been to jail," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. A young woman in a corner booth, her nails painted bright pink, leaned over to her friend and whispered, "Just another trashy girl with a few moves who thinks she's the main character." Her friend giggled, but it sounded nervous, like she wasn't sure what to think anymore. Eliza's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, but she didn't look up. She just sipped slow and deliberate, like she was waiting for something. A burly truck driver, his cap pulled low, stood up from a nearby table and crossed his arms. "You think you're some kind of badass?" he said, his voice booming across the diner. "This ain't a movie set, darling. Take your little show somewhere else." The crowd murmured in agreement, their confidence growing. Eliza didn't move, but she slid her coffee cup aside and placed a single faded photograph on the table. A grainy image of a desert checkpoint, a younger Eliza in combat gear standing beside a soldier with a bandaged arm. The truck driver's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing at the photo, but he didn't speak again. The room's bravado wavered, the murmurs fading as people craned their necks to see. Eliza's hand rested on the photo, her thumb brushing the edge, a quiet claim to a past nobody could dismiss. Hey, if this story's hitting you, maybe you've felt that sting of being judged, that moment when people look at you and decide, you're less than, can you do me a favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below about what this made you feel, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep telling stories like this. Stories that remind us we're not alone. All right, let's keep going. The diner was buzzing now, voices piling up like static. The bald guy, still sprawled on the floor, pointed a shaky finger at Eliza. "Who do you think you are?" "Some agent," he said, his voice slurring from pain. The young woman in the booth laughed loud and fake, flipping her hair. "Yeah, right. She's probably just some wannabe who watched too many action movies," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. The old man at the counter nodded like he'd figured her out. "No way she's got real training. Probably just some bar fight trick she picked up." A guy in a trucker hat sitting near the window leaned back and smirked. "Bet she's just here for attention," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Eliza didn't answer. She reached for her backpack, checking the zipper with slow, careful movements, like she was grounding herself. A middle-aged woman in a floral blouse sitting with her husband near the door decided to chime in. She adjusted her glasses and spoke in a tone that was all fake concern. "Sweetie, you shouldn't be starting fights in a place like this. It's not ladylike." Her husband nodded, his mouth full of fries, and added, "Yeah, go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The room snickered, but Eliza didn't flinch. She pulled a small tarnished dog tag from her pocket and set it on the table, her fingers lingering on the etched metal. The woman's smile faltered and her husband stopped chewing, his eyes locked on the tag. It wasn't flashy, just a name and a number, but something about it made the air feel heavier. Eliza didn't say a word, she didn't need to. The couple looked away, their faces flushed as the room's laughter died into awkward coughs. The door swung open and 2 cops walked in, their boots heavy on the linoleum. The younger one, barely out of his 20s, strode toward Eliza, pulling out his cuffs. "Hands where I can see," he barked, his voice all bravado, like he was playing a role. Eliza raised her hands, slow, her coffee cup still sitting on the table. The second cop, older with gray hair and a slight limp, stopped short when he saw her. His eyes flicked to her left wrist, where a faint twin triangle scar peeked out from under her sleeve. He stepped closer, his voice low, almost reverent. "Unit Phantom 3, he said, like he was afraid to be wrong. Eliza didn't nod, didn't speak. She just looked at him, her eyes steady. The older cop straightened his face pale and gave her a sharp military salute. The younger cop froze, the cuffs dangling in his hand, his confidence gone. A local reporter who'd been nursing a coffee in the corner saw his chance. He stood up, notepad in hand, and called out, "Hey, if you're such a big deal, why don't you tell us your story? Or is it all just smoke and mirrors?" The crowd leaned in, eager for her to stumble. Eliza didn't look at him. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small folded flag, the kind given at military funerals, its edges frayed from years of being carried. She set it beside the dog tag, her fingers brushing the fabric with a tenderness that silenced the room. The reporter's pen stopped moving his notepad, lowering as he stared at the flag. The crowd's eagerness faded, replaced by a heavy, unspoken question. Whose flag was that, and why did it matter so much? The old man at the counter wasn't buying it. He slammed his mug down, coffee splashing onto the counter. "I don't believe she ever served," he said, his voice rough from years of smoking. "No spec ops girl walks like that." The waitress, wiping her hands on her apron, sneered. "Maybe she was just a mess hall nurse," she said, dragging out the word nurse like it was an insult. The trucker hat guy muttered, "These female war hero tales are just online myths." An elderly woman in a corner, her glasses perched on her nose, leaned forward and whispered to her friend, "Girls like her belong at a front desk." Eliza's eyes twitched just for a second at the word nurse. It was the first crack anyone saw in her calm. A man in a cowboy hat sitting alone at a booth decided to add his voice. He leaned back, his boots propped on the seat across from him, and drawled, "If she's such a big deal, why's she eating alone in a dump like this?" The room chuckled, feeding off his confidence. He pulled out a toothpick, rolling it between his teeth, and continued, "Bet she's running from something. Nobody that tough just sits there quiet." Eliza's hand paused on her coffee cup, her fingers curling slightly. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased like it had been carried for years. She set it next to the dog tag, not opening it, just letting it sit there. The cowboy's smirk faded, his toothpick stopping mid-roll. Nobody could see what was on the paper, but the way he shifted in his seat said he didn't want to know. She rolled up her sleeve, slow and deliberate, revealing a faded tattoo on her forearm, a medical symbol coiled with a black snake, its eyes sharp and unyielding. She looked straight at the old man, her voice low but clear, cutting through the noise. "I was the last one standing during the ambush in Sangin, Afghanistan." The words hit like a shockwave. The old man's mouth opened, then closed, his cigarette trembling in his hand. Another guy, a veteran by the look of his faded army jacket, stammered, "Ghost Viper." That unit was wiped from records. Eliza's gaze didn't waver. "We existed, until you left us behind." The room went still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Nobody dared speak. Her words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of a truth nobody could argue with. An older woman, her hair tied back in a neat bun, stood up from a booth near the window, clutching a rosary. "You don't belong here causing trouble," she said, her voice sharp with judgment. "Real heroes don't start fights in diners." The crowd nodded, their murmurs growing bolder. Eliza didn't look at her. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small tarnished medal, its ribbon faded but intact. She set it on the table next to the flag and dog tag, her fingers steady despite the room's hostility. The woman's rosary beads stopped clicking, her hands frozen as she stared at the medal. The crowd's murmurs faltered, the weight of the objects on the table sinking in. Eliza's silence wasn't weakness. It was a wall, and nobody knew how to climb it. The diner owner broke the silence, his voice shaking but defiant. "You better leave before it gets worse," he said, pointing at the door. A staff member, a kid with acne and a nervous twitch, yanked the blinds down, shutting out the neon glow. The jukebox was already off, but the silence felt heavier now, like a judgment. A big guy in a flannel shirt stood up holding a taser, his knuckles white around the handle. "People around here don't like your kind," he said, stepping closer, his boots scuffing the floor. Someone in the back muttered, I'll call the military if she doesn't leave. Eliza didn't flinch. She pulled a crumpled $10 bill from her pocket, set it next to her coffee, and stood up. Her eyes locked on the guy with the taser, and he took a step back, his hand shaking just enough to notice. A teenage girl, barely 16, stood up from a booth in the back, her phone still in her hand from snapping pictures. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the tension. You think you're tough? You're just a nobody trying to act like a hero. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with a photo of Eliza sitting alone. This is going viral, and everyone's gonna laugh at you. The room stirred, some nodding in agreement, others smirking. Eliza didn't look at the girl. She reached down, picked up the dog tag, and tucked it back into her pocket, her fingers brushing the metal like it was an old friend. The girl's bravado faltered, her phone lowering slightly. Eliza's silence wasn't just calm, it was heavy, like it carried a story the girl couldn't begin to understand. The room felt it, and the smirks started to fade. Then the ground started to rumble. A low, thundering roar shook the windows, making the coffee cups rattle. Everyone turned, craning their necks toward the parking lot. Rotor blades. A Black Hawk helicopter was landing right there, kicking up dust under the neon lights. The regulars spilled outside, some tripping over chairs in their hurry. A man in a colonel's uniform stepped out of the chopper, his boots crunching on the gravel. He walked into the diner, his eyes scanning the room until they found Eliza. He stopped at her table, gave a sharp nod, and said, "We need you again." Eliza slung her backpack over her shoulder, her face as calm as ever. But before she walked out, she turned just for a moment and looked at the room. Her eyes weren't angry, weren't afraid, just cold, like she saw every single one of them for who they were. A man in a business suit who'd been quiet until now stood up from a corner table, his face flushed with indignation. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice loud enough to draw every eye. "You're all falling for this act. She's probably some stunt double or a con artist." He pointed at Eliza, his watch glinting under the lights. Real heroes don't slink around in dirty clothes. The crowd murmured, some nodding, feeding off his certainty. Eliza paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She turned slightly just enough to meet his eyes and let out a single soft breath, a sound that wasn't quite a sigh, but carried more weight than any words. The man's jaw tightened, and he sat down, his bluster gone. The colonel didn't even glance at him, his focus still on Eliza. The bald guy, now strapped to a stretcher outside, wasn't done. "You're no hero," he hissed, as the paramedics wheeled him past. "You're just a relic." The diner owner standing by the door snorted. "Legends don't order $4 fried eggs," he said, crossing his arms. A kid with a phone filming the whole thing laughed. "I'm posting this. Let's show the world who this legend really is," he said, angling his camera at Eliza as she walked toward the helicopter. The elderly woman, the one who'd whispered about front desks, chuckled. Kids these days always thinking they're some action star. Eliza didn't turn around. She climbed into the Black Hawk, her backpack slung across her shoulder, her glasses catching the light for just a second before the door slid shut. A quiet man in a faded denim jacket who'd been watching from the back stood up as the helicopter's roar faded. He walked to Eliza's table, picked up the folded piece of paper she'd left behind, and unfolded it carefully. It was a letter handwritten addressed to a soldier who never made it home. The room watched as he read it silently, his hands trembling. "She carried this," he said, his voice breaking. This was Tommy's. He held up the letter, his eyes wet, and the crowd went still. Nobody knew who Tommy was, but the pain in the man's voice was enough to make them look away ashamed. The letter was refolded, placed back on the table, and the man walked out, leaving the diner in a silence that felt like a confession. But the story didn't start that night in the diner. Years ago, in a dusty village in Afghanistan, Eliza had been someone else. A medic, her hands steady even as gunfire tore through the air. The ambush in Sangin had come without warning. Her unit Ghost Viper caught in a trap. She had dragged her teammates to cover bandaged wounds under fire, kept them alive until the choppers came. But not everyone made it. She'd watched friends die, their blood on her hands, their last words in her ears. The twin triangle scar on her wrist wasn't just a mark. It was a reminder of the shrapnel she'd taken pulling a soldier to safety. The tattoo, the snake around the medical symbol, was her promise to never forget. She didn't talk about it, didn't wear it like a badge, but it was there in the way she moved, the way she carried herself. As the helicopter's roar faded, a grizzled trucker who'd been silent through it all stood up from his stool at the counter. He pulled a worn cap off his head, revealing a scar across his scalp, and spoke in a gravelly voice. I knew a medic like her once. Saved my leg in 03. Y'all just spat on someone who would die for you. He tossed a crumpled bill on the counter and walked out, his boots heavy on the floor. The room froze, the weight of his words sinking in. The young woman with the pink nails looked down at her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen, suddenly unsure. The cowboy in the booth shifted his toothpick, falling to the table. Eliza was already gone, but the trucker's voice lingered like a judgment nobody could escape. By morning, the news hit like a tidal wave. Every major network was running the story. Only survivor of Operation Echo Line returns, one anchor said, her voice catching. The Pentagon ceremony was broadcast live, flags snapping in the wind. Eliza walked in still in her plain jacket and jeans, her glasses slightly crooked. The top brass stood their salutes, sharp and unwavering. The camera lingered on her face, those same quiet eyes unchanged from the night before. The caption told the world what the diner hadn't known: Eliza Monroe, the silent viper. A legend that doesn't need applause. A retired general sitting in the Pentagon audience stood up as Eliza passed. He removed his cap, revealing a tremor in his hand, and nodded to her, his eyes wet with something unspoken. The camera caught it, and the moment went viral. Millions saw the respect in his gesture, a silent acknowledgement of her sacrifice. Back in the diner, the regulars would never know, but that nod carried the weight of 1,000 apologies, a recognition of what they'd failed to see. Eliza didn't acknowledge it. She just kept walking, her steps steady, her backpack slung over her shoulder. The room parted for her, the silence louder than any applause. The consequences came fast. The bald guy's name was plastered across social media, his face in every screenshot from the diner video. A local news outlet dug up his record petty theft bar, fights a string of DUIs. His construction job was gone by noon, his boss citing unacceptable conduct. The leather jacket guy, the wannabe influencer, lost his energy drink, deals his Instagram buried under a flood of comments, quoting his own mockery. The buzz-cut kid, the one who'd grabbed for her bag, saw his car dealership job vanish before he could even start. The diner owner's business took the hardest hit reviews, tanked with people calling it the place that shamed a hero. The waitress, the one who'd sneered about nurses, quit a week later, unable to handle the stares. The kid with the phone deleted his video, but it was too late. Screenshots were everywhere. The woman in the red dress who'd mocked Eliza's clothes found her own face trending online. Someone recognized her as a local realtor, and her business cards started appearing in memes captioned with her own cruel words. Her listings dried up, clients canceling appointments without explanation. The couple in the floral blouse and fries who'd called Eliza unladylike faced whispers at their church group, their neighbors sharing the diner video with raised eyebrows. The teenage girl's viral post backfired. Her school's group chat lit up with classmates calling her out, and her parents grounded her for a month. The man in the suit, the one who'd called her a con artist, saw his law firm's Yelp page flooded with one-star reviews, his colleagues distancing themselves at the next board meeting. Eliza didn't see any of it. She was gone, whisked away to wherever the Black Hawk had taken her. The diner went back to its usual rhythm, but it was different. The regulars avoided her table, their eyes darting away when they passed it. The cook wiped it down slower than usual, like he was thinking about her. The waitress's replacement didn't talk as much. Nobody said her name out loud, but they all felt it. The weight of what they'd done, what they'd said. Eliza hadn't needed to yell or fight for their respect. She'd just stood there quiet, steady, and let the world catch up. And it did. Her story wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror for everyone who'd ever been looked down on, judged for how they dressed or where they stood. For everyone who'd carried their truth in silence, waiting for the day it would speak for itself. Eliza Monroe didn't need to shout. Her life did that for her. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.